talk about why we fall for misinformation, but I'm going to start with a bit of a story and come back to it at the end. So in 1981, the CDC noted a new disease that was primarily impacting gay men in California and New York. Over the next few years, the disease was named AIDS. The virus that causes AIDS, HIV, was discovered. But cases were growing quickly, and lots of new infections, and people were scared, right? We had a new virus and no new treatments yet. How is it being spread? Who is being impacted? What was the cause? And there was also a lot of homophobia. People were claiming, for example, that it was punishment for immoral behavior. And it was even named various things along the lines of gay disease, gay cancer. By the late 80s, the cause, or the origin, I should say, of HIV was discovered. A chimp, probably from bushmeat, the practice of hunting and slaughtering bushmeat. But again, at the time, there was a lot of unknowns. Today, by the way, over 35 million people have died from AIDS. So this is Ed Graves. Ed Graves was born in 1952. He grew up in Ohio. By all accounts, he was extremely intelligent. He went to the Naval Academy. And in 1992, just a couple of weeks before he graduated from law school, he was diagnosed with AIDS. And he went on a hunt for what was the cause. And his research led him to the conclusion that HIV was created as a bioweapon at Fort Detrick in Maryland. Kernel of truth to that, by the way. Fort Detrick had been the site of bioweapons testing several decades earlier. But that the virus had escaped from the lab, and the purpose of the virus was a genocide against black people. He actually thought he had been infected by HIV through either mosquitoes that were bred to spread HIV, or a dart gun, which he called a microbioinoculator, that could shoot people from up to 100 feet away without their awareness. He also went on a search for cures, and we should say, he wrote up his proof that HIV had been created by the government, and this state origin, the evidence of the laboratory birth of AIDS. And he was quoted as saying, if they didn't want me to discover the true origin of AIDS, they shouldn't have given it to me. By the way, the quote, "The man who solved AIDS," came from his website. He was lauded in many African countries as the man who had solved AIDS. He also went searching for cures, and part of that led him to Tetrasil, which was tetrasilver tetroxide. He received an injection of it, and he claimed his health improved immediately. And he also claimed that it had cured many people within 3 weeks. So he went on a promotion. He promoted this not only in the United States, but also in Africa. Now, Graves obviously fell for misinformation, and it was harmful misinformation. But we're all Ed Graves at some level. So we're going to come back to Ed Graves. We live in a time of a lot of information and a lot of misinformation, and our goal is to spot the difference between the two. Misinformation is defined as information that's false or misleading. It does not matter the intention of the person who is spreading it. But importantly, information impacts our beliefs. It impacts how we see the world, and therefore the decisions that we make. And so we want to make sure that we can sort the good from the bad. And when I was trying to understand why we fall for misinformation, I kept coming back to this picture of, well, we're focusing on misinformation here, but if we look at big picture, my little square attempt at helping us understand the difference. So I've got on the true and false. This is, broadly speaking, information that is either true or false. It can be more complicated than obviously. And we either accept it or reject it. Now, this is what we don't want to do. We don't want to reject true information, and we don't want to accept false information. And this is what Graves did. He rejected what we knew about AIDS, and he accepted things that were not true. What we want to do, though, is this. We want to accept true information and reject false information. So the focus on misinformation is a bit narrow in my mind. What we want to do is see the bigger picture. And importantly, a lot of focuses on misinformation and protecting ourselves and others from misinformation focuses on the characteristics of misinformation itself, and that is important. But the reason that we fall for misinformation is us. So if we want to not fall for misinformation, if we want to understand why we fall for misinformation, we both need to understand how misinformation works and understand our vulnerabilities so that we don't fall for it. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to start with us, and then we're going to go to misinformation. When we decide to accept information, so belief is anything that we accept as true, broadly speaking, we are not blank slates. We have wiring built into the brain that helps us make sense of information. And that wiring includes things like looking for patterns, trying to understand if those patterns are actually real, intuitive thinking, our fast thinking. Massimo referred to the biases and heuristics. All of that is part of that fast decision making. Our biases and, importantly, our emotions. So that's the internal part of us, what we're born with. And then there are external sources, both personal experiences and received wisdom. So personal experiences is like, I recently went to my very first Bigfoot museum. It was really fascinating. She was, bless her heart, true believer. Bigfoot was obviously real. We're going to come back to her a bit later, but like one of her main lines of evidence was, I saw Bigfoot. And I know other people who tell me they saw Bigfoot, right? So we believe ourselves, and we believe what others tell us. The received wisdom, though, actually all of this comes down to trust. Like we trust ourselves. We trust our perceptions. We trust our thinking. And we also trust people in our social groups. We trust our authorities, parents, clergy. We trust members of our tribe, our social group. I mean, historically speaking, humans were a tribal species. We lived in small groups, and those groups were the source of our protection. We had to trust them. We don't live in that environment anymore, though. Again, like Massimo said, we can go online and find anybody who believes the same thing that we believe. And next thing you know, they're our tribe. And we believe what they tell us because they're part of our group. So all of this swims in a sea of trust. And this is important because if we want to make sure that we align our beliefs with what's true to the best of our abilities to do so, it behooves us to make sure that we place our trust wisely, that we're skeptical of certain things, and we place trust where it belongs. But all of that then comes back to I was right? It's really difficult for us to know the difference between things that we're actually sure about, and let me just say, certainty is a feeling, right? It comes to us, we don't know that we don't know. For example, I was raised in a young earth creationist church. So the earth was 6,000 years old. God created everything in its current form. Everything was destroyed in Noah's flood. And I believed that because I believed people around me, right? They were my people. They also warned me about them, right? They were dangerous. And they would try to convince you with these evidence, these arguments. But here's why those are wrong. Right, so they armed me with they were straw versions of the arguments, but it certainly felt real to me. And then I would have my own personal experiences that affirmed my faith. As a science educator and communicator, we have long operated under the information deficit model. This is, people don't accept evolution, for example, or any number of true things that are supported by a lot of evidence. They don't believe those things because they don't have all the evidence. So I'm going to give them the evidence. I'm going to show them all the lines of evidence for evolution. I can tell you that those would not have worked on me. I was primed against those arguments. And I trusted my side. Once our beliefs are formed, they form a web in our head. This web is the interconnectedness of those beliefs. They're all connected to each other. The ones at the middle are the ones that are the most important to us, but they're all connected in some way. And so something like young Earth creationism and evolution denial for me, that was central to who I was, and it connected me to my people. Somebody couldn't go in there and pick a piece and say, see, this is wrong, especially if they were mocking me for doing so. What they would need to do is understand how my whole worldview made sense and how those beliefs fit together. And then help me not just make holes in my understanding, but build a consistent worldview based on true information. So why are we vulnerable to misinformation? Jonathan Haidt's elephant in the writer. It is an oversimplification, of course, but it's really a helpful way to understand what's going on in our head. Basically, our elephant is the part of the brain that's always on. It's emotional, it's biased, it uses shortcuts. And then our writer, instead of thinking critically about things, goes, yeah, that sounds about right. And then just often finds ways to rationalize them. So the kinds of things that can cause our elephant to rampage, motivated reasoning, especially if our motivations are things like identity protection or our social groups, our values, what we think is right and wrong, our emotions are at play. If we feel ourselves being triggered, like especially anger and fear, that's a pretty good sign that our ability to think critically might be impacted. Also, trust is on there, but trust is closely related to polarization. We live in a climate where we are highly polarized, and so what we do is we just retreat to our group, and we assume that our group is right. Not only is it highly improbable that all of our beliefs are true, our tribe is probably not right about everything either. So how do we know the difference? For me, it's important to know what's going on in our brain, our vulnerabilities, so that we can be aware when we are more likely to fall for misinformation. There's one more thing I want to point out up there, and that's repetition. The more we hear something, the more likely we are to accept it as true. Our brain mistakes fluency, like ease of processing, with truth. This is really a danger if you're in an echo chamber, for example, where the same false information just keeps circulating because you've seen it lots of times. You don't think about it. You just accept it as true. So we're vulnerable to misinformation because of these various reasons. But this is also what misinformation plays into. It targets us at this level. So now we're going to talk briefly about the various types of misinformation. I'm going to broadly put them into fake news and science as pretenders. Like, I have this example for a very personal reason, actually. A couple of years ago, around this time of year, I saw this circulating on in my little echo chambers. With a lot of people sharing it, like, can you believe Americans' diets are so bad? Okay, now remember, why do we fall for misinformation? It confirms what we think is true, it triggers emotions. In this case, it makes us laugh, and especially if it's repeated a lot. But I saw this and I thought, I don't know, that doesn't seem right. So I went to Facebook as my biggest social media platform. I went to Facebook and I said, this has been circulating. It is also not true. Let me show you how to fact check. And I have an article and a graphic on how to fact check. I say, here's the steps. Here's what I found. Snopes says this is an altered image. It's a joke. Okay, put that out there. Facebook, not that I'm bitter, but Facebook allowed this image to circulate for weeks and then put me in jail for spreading a manipulated image. Even though I was trying to use it to show people why this is wrong. important lesson here is that if you're a content creator online and you're trying to help people understand misinformation, those algorithms catch a lot of false positives. And so we often self-censor, like, I don't share this anymore because I'm gonna go into jail. Okay. Another type of so-called fake news, I have fake news in quotes because this term is basically meaningless these days, but nevertheless, the kinds of news types of information is things that are out of context. So this here, it says retweet if you say no to animal testing. If you know anything about me, you know I am a cat, when I say lover, that's really an understatement. I am childless cat lady. Oh, I also like birth control. Thank you, science. So this would really tick me off if I didn't know the difference, right? This looks awful. But if you are in vet med at all or have done anything in this kind of area of science, you know that is what people do when they put cats under for surgery. That's part of an adopt-a-thon. This means it is a real image or video, but it's being taken out of context to make a point that is not true. So in this case, it is really hard. We believe pictures in particular. So even question pictures, so out of context. Next is things that are manipulated. You remember in early 2020, before the pandemic, but Australia was on fire? Okay. So this image circulated quite regularly. Does this look like she's got a gas mask and a koala bear? It's adorable. Nevertheless, here is the original images. Right, so it is manipulated. These days it's incredibly easy to manipulate photos and videos. And then finally, things that are completely wrong. False, false, false. This circulated in 2016 in right-leaning echo chambers. It is just not true. This circulated in left-wing echo chambers. Also not true. Completely made up. Now, again, why would we fall for these things? They confirm what we think is true. We're emotional, especially if it's in part of our group. Dunking on the other side is really satisfying. You have to be careful of self-righteousness, though, because we're all vulnerable. Okay, and then we have another type of misinformation, which I call science's pretenders. These that are things that are seemingly science, but they're not. So pseudoscience pretends to be scientific, but it doesn't adhere to science's methodology, whereas science denial is a refusal to accept strongly supported scientific conclusions. Now notice the motivations and the result. So pseudoscience is motivated by wanting to believe, a need for hope, for example, or an identity need. And because we want to believe, we have a lower standard of evidence. But conversely, science denial is motivated by not wanting to believe. And so as a result, we set a standard of evidence that's impossibly high. It's just a theory, right? We don't know for sure, 100%. A couple of examples of this. This is Belle Gibson, an Australian influencer. Some of you know who she is, apparently. So Belle Gibson got very famous and made lots of money with her health and wellness, blogging, apps, and so on. She was an influencer. She even had Apple's Health App of the Year. I think it was 2012. Nevertheless, Belle Gibson got brain cancer and then documented her journey where she cured her brain cancer with her healthy diet and lifestyle. She made the rounds, right, in media. This is a good story. Cancer's scary. We want solutions. We have a bias sometimes against evil big pharma. She never had cancer, right? She made the whole thing up. Why would people believe this? Because we want to. Conversely, science denial is refusal to accept strongly supported conclusions. So in this case, the tobacco industry famously, Name Your Essays did a great job documenting this, how the tobacco industry did not want to be regulated. So they knew that they didn't have to convince Americans that that smoking was great for us, or even we didn't know for sure that it was harmful for us. They needed to sow enough doubt to confuse us, to go, well, why would we regulate? We don't know enough. They had a memo in 1969, doubt is our product, since it's the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the minds of the general public. It was just confusion. The oil and gas industry did the same thing, often with the same people and the same think tanks. Why should we regulate? We don't know for sure. Okay. Science denial and pseudoscience often feed on each other. This is from, it's no longer there, but it's from a textbook in Atlanta. Look, if we don't want to believe something, a strongly supported scientific conclusion, then we have a problem because we don't have an explanation for something. We need to compete with that explanation that we're denying. So we fill that with pseudoscience. Or if we really want to believe something, then we are motivated to deny the relevant science. The point is, these often fuel each other. If we want to believe in ghosts, we might have to deny things like physics. If we want to believe in homeopathy, we might need to, I don't know, that's just magic. So nevertheless, these things often fuel each other. We need to know our weaknesses, that's the point. Back when I was a young Earth creationist, I denied evolution because that meant God wasn't real, and my tribe is wrong, and I wasn't special in this universe. And so to deny evolution then, I had to accept creationism with very low standards of evidence. It comes back to our elephant and our motivations. And then finally, the root of all misinformation is a conspiracy theory. This is me at the Bigfoot Museum. I saw Bigfoot. Conspiracy theories are really the only way to explain why all of the evidence and the experts don't support our position. Right? If you dig down far enough, you get to conspiracy theories. This wonderful woman at the Bigfoot Museum, to her, believing in Bigfoot also meant believing in creationism. So she denied evolution. She accepted, I saw Bigfoot. Oh, and one of the lines of evidence was like tree breaks. Like trees, like there's nothing else that can cause a tree break besides. Nevertheless, so kept going through the museum, and we finally got to, well, there is evidence, but the government and scientists are hiding it. Right? You dig down far enough and you get to conspiracies. They protect us from things that we don't want to believe. Look, there are real conspiracy theories, but if we want to find them, we need evidence. Conspiratorial thinking does not help us find real conspiracy theories. Critical thinking does. Conspiracy theories are a trap. Right? They're an epistemic black hole. Once we're in them, all evidence confirms the conspiracy. Missing evidence was hidden. Evidence that would disprove the conspiracy theory was planted. Right? All of it confirms the conspiracy theory. Also, this is the squid guy from Star Trek, right? I know. That was really for Kenny's benefit. Okay, so back to Ed Graves. This is with his like timeline logic map that proved that the government created HIV. He died, by the way, at the age of 59 in 2009. His cause of death is not public, so we don't know why. Ed Graves denied science. He fell for pseudoscience, and at the root of it was conspiracies. But Ed Graves is not alone. I couldn't find a recent poll, but as recently as 2005, 50% of African Americans believed that HIV was created by the government. And about 15% thought that it was specifically for a genocide against Black people. And the question is why? So when polls asked people, what they referred to was things like this. The government had done it before. It was believable that they would do it again. The Tuskegee experiment, by the way, was it ran till 1972. I think it started in 32. Black men who had syphilis were denied treatment to see what would happen. This continued after penicillin was discovered as a cure in the 40s. The last impacted person didn't die until 2004. This is really recent, and it's certainly recent in people's memories. Ed Graves was a gay Black man trying to understand why he was sick. He had been victimized by the US government, by society. He was marginalized. So it does make sense that he would be vulnerable to mistrusting sources. But where did he get his information from? So in 1983, this article appeared in an Indian newspaper called The Patriot. So mystery disease caused by US experiments. So this article was supposedly by a well-known American scientist, but it was anonymous. So moving forward a bit, the Siegel report was in 1986. If you see here, it says AIDS, USA, homemade evil, not imported from Africa. Jakob Siegel was supposedly a French biologist, but actually he was a retired East German physicist. Nevertheless, this report was distributed pretty widely, even at developing nation conferences in Africa in the 80s, who felt blamed for the virus coming from Africa. And this said, look, it wasn't Africa. It was the US government, and they wanted to kill Black people. So this continued to spread. In 1987, here's Dan Rather reporting on it. By 1987, it had been covered in major media outlets in 80 countries and 30 languages. Where did that come from? Turned out that original plant was the Soviet Union. So in the 1980s, we were also fighting a Cold War with the USSR, and so they used disinformation as a strategy. What they wanted to do was target enemy divisions, plant a narrative that made sense to people who were victimized by it, let it go, plant a new story, reference the original, plant another one, reference those, and keep doing that for a bit until it started propagating on its own. They wanted to divide us, and so they used our existing divisions. That entire story that Ed Graves and so many people fell for was a Soviet lie. Now, disinformation is a type of misinformation that is spread purposefully. It is a lie. Disinformation's goal is to sow distrust. It's not necessarily to convince us of something that's not true or to convince us of a false narrative. Its goal is to create enough confusion that we just go, I don't know who to believe. I'm gonna throw up my hands in the air and just, well, I can't believe anything. I can't trust anybody. Or I just trust people in my tribe, which means I might be misled. By the way, Russia is still at it. In 2016, Senate investigations have found that Russia targeted Black Americans more than any group. Not just Black Americans, though. They used issues like guns, like vaccines, purposefully find divisions and fill that with false narratives. They did it again in 2020, and they are doing it again now. We are divided. We are polarized. We don't trust each other, which means we're vulnerable. Importantly, this is an all of us problem. So whenever I tell people that I help people fight, not fall for misinformation, by the way, in class, one of my favorite things to do is I have my students create misinformation so that they can see how the techniques work. So we make a game out of it. It's really fun. Nevertheless, whenever I tell people that, they say, Oh, wow, misinformation, such a big problem. Yeah, oh my God. Can you believe all those stupid people that fall for all this stupid stuff? We keep talking, almost without fail. When I find theirs, they get triggered. We are all vulnerable. The moment we think we're not vulnerable is when we're vulnerable. Overconfidence can really get in our own way. And no one is here to save us, right? The social media companies aren't doing it. It's on us. So check before you believe it, and especially before you share it, because people trust you. So remember that misinformation appeals to our biases. I love this quote, like, we are the easiest person to fool. This is why we have science. Science is a way to not fool ourselves. So we need to understand what our vulnerabilities are and what how misinformation works. I also, as I'm nearing the end here, I have a very special announcement to make. This is the first time I'm saying this publicly, but my book will be released in 2 years, and it's about misinformation and different types of misinformation. So I just wanted to share that with some of my favorite people. Thank you. I honestly did not do that for the applause, but I appreciate it nonetheless. And also, by saying this out loud, I've kind of committed myself. So anyway, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Latest article is in Skeptical Inquirer. Please subscribe if you are not subscribing, and thank you again.